Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Invisible Not Broken. I'm Eva, your co host, and I interview practitioners with chronic illnesses. But actually, today is a little bit different. I'm interviewing a practitioner, but she doesn't have a chronic illness, but we are going to talk about her experience with her daughter who had one. She is an integrative functional medicine board certified internal medicine physician. Yes, mouthful, but it basically just means that she is the real deal. She is smart, creative, kind, thinks outside the box, and she is so lovely. We hit it off immediately when we met, and we weren't even meeting to talk about the podcast, but I knew I had to have her on. And as I expected, this was a wonderful episode that I plan on revisiting myself again and again. So sit tight and enjoy my conversation with Dr. Bojana Yankovic-Weatherly. Hello, Dr. Bojana. Lovely to have you on the podcast today. I'm so excited.
Hi, it's so great to be here, and I'm so excited for the opportunity to chat with you today, and just absolutely love your podcast. I've been listening to it, and love the messages that you're bringing out there to the world. So thank you.
Yeah, wow, thank you for that. That's really wonderful to hear, and I love how when we met, my intention was not actually to bring you onto the podcast. I just wanted to learn more about your work, and then I was like, oh my God, she needs to come on. Because you're just fabulous in so many ways. But yeah, now let's let everyone else hear why you're fabulous. So as always, I like to start with, please tell us your story. In this case, it might be a little bit of a different story, in whatever way you'd like to tell it, from your perspective as a physician and as a human.
Absolutely. So I'm going to share my story as it relates to the way that we met and some of the things that we had talked about initially, because I think that one of the reasons why your story really resonated and this concept of having this podcast where you openly talk about your own condition, other people's conditions and experiences, as well as then our experiences as professionals, is just it's so important and not talked about enough. And I think that unfortunately there's so much judgment still from all sides, and it's really important to kind of let our guard down a little bit and really be okay with looking within, whether we're looking for answers for ourselves, whether we're looking to help others, because I think that just amplifies our effect on ourselves, our health, on the world, on the people that we touch and influence. So I'm a board certified internist, as you know, but my path to becoming a fellowship trained integrative medicine doctor and a functional medicine doctor was definitely not a straightforward one. And when I was little, I didn't even really know what integrative and functional medicine were, nor that that's something that would just so deeply resonate with the core of my being. As my colleagues in pre-med, I went into medical school thinking that I'm going to change the world, I'm going to help so many people. There are all these exciting tools and therapies that we can use to help people with certain illnesses and symptoms. And then going through the medical training and residency training and becoming a primary care physician, I found out that clearly I was very naive. And there were many conditions that were considered to be mysteries, where we couldn't find the actual physical evidence of what exactly it is that needs to be repaired or what it is that's malfunctioning. And I found that time and time again, my colleagues and myself would see patients with a constellation of symptoms, whether they're fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome or depression or anxiety, or that we just couldn't get to the root of it. And unfortunately, pharmaceuticals were being, handed out like candy because there was just no better way that we were trained or or thought to kind of think about these problems. And I had a big problem with that. Fundamentally, I just was not okay. I didn't feel that I could go on practicing like this. I think that there were a lot of very, very, very valuable lessons throughout my training. And I'm so happy that I went the way that I did. But I also knew that I needed to look for more answers and get more information and really find a deeper way to help my patients by looking at the root cause and then looking at all the evidence-based modalities, some of them which we learn about in medical school and residency training, and some of which we don't learn about. And we have no idea how to use them, when to use them, or even what to expect in terms of results. And what I found was the biggest thing as that door kind of started to open for me is that it gave me hope, it gave my patients hope. And I think that's really kind of one of the first things that just sort of opened my eyes and said, okay, you're going on this path, there's no turning back. And one of the things that in kind of reflecting back and thinking about, you know, how did I end up in integrative and functional medicine and get to do all these amazing things, is that I would say it probably started in my residency training when I decided in my second year of residency training that I was ready to be a mom. And so I was pregnant and doing 30, 35-hour shifts, sometimes working 6 days a week, 60 plus hours a week, doing the best I could to take care of my body and protect my growing baby, but not really having very much freedom in how I were to do that because of these hours and because I was taking care of very sick patients. And I loved what I did. But I just reached this point of extreme fatigue, exhaustion, and guilt because I was supposed to be focusing my efforts on the one hand, helping people and being a stellar medical resident, and on the other hand, of growing this baby and giving it not only nutrients, but love and support and calm. And I was anything but calm at that point.
It's hard during residency.
It's a little hard. But at the same time, it was a decision that I'd made, and it was a conscious decision that I take ownership of. And I did the best I could in that situation. So I started taking up prenatal yoga. And that was kind of my first little glimpse of, oh, wow, look at what prenatal yoga does to my body and how I can visualize my baby and send my baby these amazing messages and massage the baby. And it really started to kind of open up this window a little bit of, okay, even in these, very intense circumstances, we can create an environment for ourselves where we can feel empowered and where we can change the things that we're in control of, right? Because we're always going to have things that are beyond our control. And in fact, most things are beyond our control, whether it's natural disasters, whether it's our family or friends getting ill, beyond our control. Actions of other people, judgments of other people, beyond our control. But we can control how we respond to these experiences, and we can control our microenvironment and what we create during our time that's just for us. So again, that was just kind of a tiny little opening. I went on to complete my internal medicine residency, had my second child after that, and started practicing as an internist. And as a mom who just started this practice as part of a medical group, I felt very much torn again. On the one hand, I was leaving my babies at home that needed me after about 3 months of mat leave each time, and feeling this immense guilt and literally crying, like driving to work and crying every morning, I would say for at least a couple of months. Again, I still loved what I do. I felt so lucky to be, I'm an internist, I get to do primary care, I actually get to help people, but I'm leaving these 2 babies at home. And I think that kind of, maybe, I don't know if I should call it disconnect, or kind of these competing needs and desires and wanting to be everything to everyone, and wanting to do the best job that I possibly can in all these different areas of my life, I think ultimately just drove me towards burnout and to this kind of state of a lack of joy and hopelessness that we talked about just before we started recording, I think. And that was a very, very difficult time. And I think it's interesting because especially again, as a physician, and also the culture that I was brought up in. I'm originally Serbian and we immigrated to Canada when I was 13. But the culture that I was brought up in, and then my professional culture, I felt very much like, nope, I'm not supposed to feel this way. Resist, resist, resist. Just keep working, keep doing this thing and keep doing. And I think that to the outside world, I don't think it was apparent at all what was going on inside. But inside, it was just kind of like this whole, I would say, sense of overwhelm and emotions that just, as much as I was trying to suppress and say, well, this is what life is. You're always going to have these competing needs and you're always going to feel torn. I really wasn't addressing them properly. And so ultimately it just led to more and more anxiety and more of a depressed mood, because how can you feel joy and how can you feel the rewards of all the amazing things that are happening if you're so torn inside and not really addressing these things? And then of course I felt incredibly guilty for feeling that way on top of everything else, and very judgmental of myself because, how could I, a mom of these two beautiful children, a wife, a doctor, what is there to complain about? How could I possibly have anything, And so I think that working through that guilt and all of those emotions kind of, again, really started to help me see the other side. And what kind of that turning point, because I think we all have our turning points in our lives or in conditions that we have or symptoms or professional trajectories, whatever it is. That turning point really happened when I was already I had known about Dr. Andrew Weil and about the Integrative Medicine Center at the University of Arizona, where I subsequently completed my Integrative Medicine Fellowship. I was kind of, reading some articles and looking him up, and I saw that he was giving a talk at the Chopra Center at a 4-day meditation retreat that was rooted in Ayurveda and Ayurvedic practices. Now, at the time, keep in mind, I had no idea what Ayurveda was. And for listeners that may not know, it's a system of healing that originated from India that's over 5,000 years old. Very intuitive, very interesting how we can combine that with some of the modern modalities and some of the other systems of healing to really help people understand their conditions and adapt to their imbalances. But anyways, I thought, okay, well, this sounds like something that might work. I had never meditated before. I had never done any of this. And I signed up for this 4-day meditation retreat with a friend of mine. And it was a completely transformative experience. My first meditation, I just started this. It was a huge release. When I got my mantra, tears started going down, and I kept saying the mantra over and over and over again. And being able to, even though it was a very short period of time, but carve out a little bit of time to just focus on what's happening inside without judgment, and by being very present with myself. It just resulted in this complete transformation of how I saw my circumstances, myself, my patients, really most importantly for my profession, my patients. It completely transformed the relationships that I had with my patients from that point forward. And it also changed for me how I saw myself as a mom and in just relating to people that are close to me. And from that point, even though I didn't really know exactly how or when, I knew that my professional trajectory was changing. And I knew that while I celebrated everything that was part of my training and wanted to maintain that, I also knew that I needed more, that it just was not enough. And it felt incredibly empowering. It gave me that hope. And I think that that hope was that first step in me helping really myself discover what I really wanted. In these Chopra Center meditations, actually, the way they start, and we can kind of get into meditation and mindfulness-based stress reduction a little bit more and kind of geek out on the studies later if you want. But I remember the questions were, who am I? What do I want? And what is my purpose? And each time the answer to that can be different. And it's not meant to, again, bring out this judgy side, but to really challenge in a more spiritual, holistic way. Well, who am I really? We all have multiple roles, but we also identify with certain things. Well, we know that we certainly shouldn't identify with our illness. We may be a person that struggled with that, or a person that has this, but we're not our illness. We're not our profession even. We're not our one singular role, that single most important role that we have in life. We're so much more than that. And I think that recognizing and truly believing that, and then starting to think about the purpose at a greater level, rather than it being so micro, for me, for instance, as in my purpose is to be a primary care physician and do this, it really was, my purpose is to help people heal. And at that point, again, I didn't know how I was going to change that trajectory or what exactly I was going to do, but I knew that whatever I did to help people heal, that I was following my purpose. So whether it was my patients, my family members, my loved ones, my friends, that was my purpose. And as long as I live every single day in that purpose, that brought that sense of joy. So that was kind of just to share like that turning point and that pivot. And then from then on, to continue the story, I completed the Integrative Medicine Fellowship program, which again was another professionally altering experience. Met some wonderful physicians and practitioners, and subsequently started my path with the Institute of Functional Medicine and their training modules. Have worked with a number of incredible mentors, and really most importantly, have been open to learning so much more from my patients. Because ultimately, every patient that comes in, every person that comes in through the door, they're the expert in their condition. Their body is not reading a textbook. So yes, it's my job to offer the evidence-based tools. It's my job to do no harm. It's my job to educate them and empower them about what we do know is happening, to identify the triggers, but they're still the expert. And I think that recognizing that and having patience with the process, again, just completely transformed the way that I the way that I saw my role and the way that I saw my contribution. And I think the value of that contribution.
It's wonderful to hear about the genuine shift in perception of care, who you are as a doctor and who patients are as people, and then therefore transferring, or I guess going through a transformation, as you said, personally and professionally, and then kind of bestowing that on your patients. I would say something you said at the beginning, hope. I wrote in my notes, I wrote it in big letters and underlined it. I don't know why, not like I would forget that word, but it just really stood out to me because I think that's something we all long for, whether that be because of our chronic conditions or just in life. We all have moments where we really hope for something, and hope is what keeps the door open to possibility. And and it's something we should all have, hopefully, and I guess we should try as much as possible with a positive air around it rather than hope, hope because I can't imagine anything worse. I don't know if
Mhm.
I'm saying that correctly. Uh,
Yes, I
and
hear you. Yeah. Hmm.
so really thank you for talking about that in relation to yourself as well as what you want to do for your patients, because we really need that. Knowing that practitioners like yourself really feel that way, making sure it's conveyed to the patient, um,
Hmm.
that it's there for them. Uh,
And I think a lot of the time, what's really interesting is that what I've observed in myself and my colleagues is that we go into medicine because a lot of our personalities are very OCD, and we want to know everything and understand everything and master it and figure it out and give answers. And so when we don't find those answers, it's really it's hard, it kind of, there's this discrepancy because we're not accepting of it. And so a lot of the times what I will hear, and I'm sure that I have done the same thing again before my eyes opened to possibilities and to, is that, okay, well, your blood work is normal, your imaging studies are normal, or whatever workup we might have done, so everything seems fine. And the patient's sitting there, but I'm not fine. And so it's really interesting because I think that when we have the answer and we know that what the cure is, then okay, there's hope. There's a clear path. And when the situation or the condition is a bit more challenging and it requires more patience and it requires multiple modalities and it requires us to admit that modern medicine just hasn't figured it out yet. We just don't understand. And it doesn't mean that everything is okay. It just means that these labs that we ran look good, but we don't understand what is triggering these symptoms. And that means we need to look deeper and do the best that we can. I think that's when a lot of people, like, rather than really focusing on what we can do and understanding that patients and trial and error might need to be done, let's say with elimination diet. That's what elimination diet is. We try something for 4 to 6 weeks or a certain period of time, and then we try to identify, well, what are the triggers there in that, of the ones that we've eliminated, and we slowly start reintroducing them. And so I think that hope lies in that, in knowing that, okay, there are options, even though we don't understand everything. And in medicine, again, it's we haven't quite been trained that way, but also it's one of those self-selecting um, properties where we go into medicine because we want all the answers and we want to know it all. So I do think that recognizing limitations, but recognizing that also there's so much out there that we need to be open to, and as long as it doesn't do any harm and as long as there's some evidence that's valuable and legitimate, let's go ahead and try it. Um, and I think that could really change that feeling and that opening and that hope in people, rather than saying, okay, everything looks fine, I don't know what else to do, this is it. And then the patient goes home and they're like, well, nobody's listening to me, nobody understands what I'm going through, and there's nothing they can do. So how can you have hope if those are the messages that you're hearing, right?
oh yeah. I think anyone with a chronic illness listening to this podcast has heard one or all of those at some point. I
Right.
know I have.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they're a wonderful doctor,
Mm-hmm.
some of them don't investigate. Now, admitting when you don't know is important. And in fact, I love doctors that say that to me,
Mm-hmm.
rather than be like, there is nothing, or wrongly diagnose me. Like, I'll still never get over, and I won't mention their name, a doctor
Mm-hmm.
that twice, because I didn't realize I was seeing them years apart. I was referred twice to a doctor on Park Ave who's like well known for being really good, I think, for surgeries because they were a rheumatologist.
Mm-hmm.
He diagnosed me with runner's knee
Mm-hmm.
twice. And each time, and I'm like ready with my story when I walk in, and I'm like, I get it's a 7-minute visit, I'm gonna rock this. And it's like, yeah, You don't understand in the slightest, and you don't care to understand.
Yeah.
And so, we talked about this a little bit before. It's not good to say, well, put them in categories of good doctor, bad doctor, like
Right.
that's way too black and white. Um, but they're also different kinds of doctors,
Yes.
right? Really, and that's actually part of Wellacopia, is that
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
not just like going through your insurance or location just because you all learned the same thing pretty much in medical school. You're
Mhm.
still different people. You have a different outlook, a different approach to care, different personalities. You are
Mhm.
different human beings, just like we're different
Mhm.
human beings.
Exactly, exactly. And that, I think that that relationship and that fit is very, very important, because we know that outcomes do vary depending on the provider or doctor patient relationship, and that you can achieve better outcomes if there's a better fit between the practitioner and the patient. And of course, we have to consider trust and establishing that. And if a doctor is not, if you feel that your doctor isn't even listening to your story, how can you possibly trust them? They could be the best specialist, and they could be doing great work in maybe other areas, but if you feel that there's no connection, there's no listening, how can there be trust? And so that automatically then kind of downgrades that patient's experience and that sense of hope, as well as that ability to really heal, if you're working with a practitioner that just where there's just that disconnect. And also knowing that the doctor is committed to giving you the answers. Any any doctor that's um, kind of like, well, I know it all, there's no evidence, and there's no, that should raise a little bit of a flag. And so what I find, and I'm part of these networks of doctors where we discuss complex cases and where we give each other advice. I think that any um, you know doctor that you're seeing, and that, for instance, that I see, I think that one of the questions that you had asked earlier was, how do you choose your own doctor? Well, knowing that they're very active in their community, constantly that they're continuing their education, that they're constantly learning from other doctors, that they're looking up research articles, that they're going to conferences. I think that that's extremely, extremely important in knowing that your doctor is growing too, and your doctor is going to look up answers that he or he may not have answers to. Um, I think that that's just, and again, that helps also build trust and hope, because they're going to be your advocate. You know that they're committed to your care.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for basically just totally validating Willacopia's mission. That's always nice. And I don't know if you want to move into this now, but I think that's really a great segue into someone we both know very well in very different ways.
Yes.
And that's Dr. Cowan, Dr.
Yes.
Steve Cowan. I don't know if any of you out there heard of him. He's become quite well known. Um, but he is a doctor that, thanks to his detective skills and
Mm-hmm.
commitment to needing to know the answers when things are a little off track, he probably saved my sister's life.
Mm-hmm.
But would you like to talk about
Yes.
your experience? Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. So Dr. Cowan, so he's a developmental pediatrician, and he is the way that I met him actually is Dr. Frank Lipman recommended him, and we had this because my daughter is suffering from anxiety and selective mutism. So of course, we went the traditional route in terms of some um, sort of in school type of therapy interventions, and another intervention called PCIT that has to do with kind of the way that parent and child are interacting, and really providing small rewards for certain behaviors, and incentivizing the child to learn certain behaviors that are good, in a sense. So for a child with anxiety, let's say in selective mutism, being able to produce speech in situations that are anxiety provoking. And for in my daughter's case, She was completely mute in school until last fall, actually. And whereas on play dates, at home, wherever else we went, she was her bubbly, chatterbox self, but at school completely mute, to the point where we didn't know if we could keep her at the school that she was at, where we just really kind of felt that we weren't very much supported in, because of her condition. And we were told many times you should consider medications. And again, not to villainize medications, because they can be very important. But in this particular case, we didn't feel that they were necessary. And we felt that there were more interventions that needed to be tried before we went down that route. And so what happened was she had worked with what we call a brave buddy. So for anyone out there that's familiar with selective mutism, typically children with selective mutism don't speak in certain environments that cause anxiety. Sometimes that could be even going out of the house. They may just become completely mute. For other children, it might be only speaking with, they only don't speak to adults, or for many kids, it can be the school setting. And so we had a brave buddy that would be with her during certain times at school that would help to encourage speech and kind of coach on tiny, tiny little steps. And again, we'll get back to the little steps later, because I think that applies to so many different conditions and approaches, because it's really in those baby steps that you achieve these giant leaps. Because there's no way that anyone could tell my daughter, okay, Olivia, if you raise your hand in front of the classroom and say the answer to, I don't know, 17 plus 5, you're going to get a prize, or you're going to get this. There's no way that she would ever do that. But if you say, hey, Olivia, if we go and quietly go up to this teacher and tell her the answer for 17 plus 5, let's try that. And then you're going to get, and then you like tiny, tiny, tiny steps. And so eventually through these interventions, she actually started to produce speech. And around this time is when we met Dr. Cowan. And one of the things that, other than the fact that he does magic tricks for children in his office, which definitely helps in trust building, because I think for kids, really, it's difficult to trust a strange adult that they see maybe once a month, and that is kind of asking and evaluating and asking all these questions to the parent and to the child. So he started with magic tricks. And Olivia just immediately kind of eased into the whole thing. And she was like, I've got this. And she was chatting with him the whole time. And I just knew that he brought her into this parasympathetic dominant state, because, again, selective mutism, anxiety, you're sympathetic nervous system driven. You're in your fight or flight. You're fighting that tiger. And that is just how we're wired. That is just what we're, I don't want to say stuck with, but what we're gifted in this life.
I like that.
So we have to work with it, right? We have to work with what we have. And she was in that fight or flight a lot of the time. Well, he completely was able to say, to kind of, hijack that sympathetic nervous system and say, I've got just the thing for you. She went into her parasympathetic and was openly able to talk and able to engage with him and so on. And one of the things that we did with him, so he is a traditionally trained pediatrician, but he also has training in traditional Chinese medicine. And as some might know, in Chinese medicine, we have these 5 elements through which the qi, the energy, flows. And he gave a questionnaire to us to determine which elements might be dominant in Olivia that could help us better understand Olivia. And so she turned out to be earth and fire. Those were her dominant ones. And some of those characteristics have to do with, like sometimes having certain amplified physical symptoms, like a lot of stomach aches. That again, that functional abdominal pain that the doctor says, you're fine, but she really would have disabling stomach aches. Other things would be, again, anxiety, kind of difficulty trusting certain situations or people, and basically feeling that you're in kind of like not safe in the world, unfortunately. And again, it could have been those very, very long hours and nights that I was working and my cortisol levels when I was pregnant with her, but who knows? But, just feeling that, that there's no sense of safety. And so in this case, understanding, okay, well, what are my main, elements in this case that guide me? And what are my predispositions? And I think for Olivia, intuitively, this just sort of made sense to her. She was like, yeah, mommy, I'm an earth and fire child, and like, this is what I am, and this is why I act this way, and this is what I'm going to do to like help me with this element and to help me with that. It just spoke to her. The other thing that he did that actually I'm planning to post something on this in more detail, but and I'd known about heart math for a very, very long time, but I hadn't used it until we walked into Dr. Cowan's office. Something I would highly, highly, highly recommend for anyone with symptoms of anxiety, panic attacks, any sort of mood symptoms that have been difficult to regulate, as well as even high blood pressure, actually.
Sorry, what was that again?
Heart math. It's called Heart Math. So the app is called so it's Inner Balance Heart Math. And what it is, it's a biofeedback tool. So you actually download the app for free on your phone, and then you purchase this little sensor that actually just goes on your earlobe that detects your heart rate. And you plug in the sensor literally into your iPhone when the app is on. And what that does is it feeds your heart rate to the phone, to the app. And what the app does is it has a visual cue for this kind of circular, colorful shape that constricts and expands. So when it constricts, you're supposed to exhale. When it expands, you inhale. And you follow that shape. And if there's good match up between what you're doing and what the visual cues are, you're going to get into a state of very good heart rate variability. So you're going to see a little graph actually on the app that shows you your heart rate at various points in time. And generally, again, parasympathetic nervous system activation and being in that state of healing, getting more blood flow to the gut, being in that more rest or digest state, in part, heart rate variability is what predicts that and what tells us that, oh yeah, look, you're in that good state. So usually what I see with myself or with my daughter or patients that I give this to, usually, it's not uncommon to start with a heart rate of, 100 and, or even higher than 100 if you're just kind of a little bit in that stressed out state. Well, by the end of the session, and by the way, the session can be 5 minutes, it can be 30 minutes, you could be on the app as long as you want. And there are benefits. I say to people, even 5 minutes, if you can do 5 minutes a day, better than nothing. But even after 5 minutes, you see that the heart rate has gone down nicely, and then you're getting that nice heart rate variability. So let's say the heart rate goes between 50 and 75 beats a minute in a nice, beautiful sinusoid wave. So Dr. Cowan really kind of reintroduced me to that and showed me how easy it was that we started using it, and I started using it for myself, and I love showing it to my patients, because then they really get to see it's this immediate biofeedback where you see, okay, what I'm doing and changing my breathing pattern and taking these deep, slow breaths is actually affecting my heart. I'm affecting my physiology by literally just paying attention to my breathing, which can be extremely powerful, because oftentimes when we feel in that helpless, hopeless state, we don't feel that we have any kind of control over our physiology, but we do.
Yeah, that really goes back to baby steps.
Yes.
You're talking about, and I do talk about this with others on the podcast. That I know a lot of us are in, you could say, that fight or flight state with just how we feel about our illnesses. It's like so acute for this chronic illness. It's an acute pain that's going on that you don't know when it's going to end, and so it's very hard to think of the baby steps. And I won't get into it now, but I've been having a lot of discussions with people with chronic illnesses about the we'll say the opioid crisis.
Yes.
And yeah, that's a whole big topic.
Oh, yes.
But just how a lot of people have been saying in these Facebook groups I'm part of and run that they're being denied, one, because they might be seen as pill poppers, but it's terrible.
Yeah.
But they really just want to say that there are times where we're going to need opioids of some sort
Mm-hmm.
to function at all, but that doesn't mean that they don't want to take care of themselves in these baby step ways.
Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
you said, medications are not necessarily the villain. I personally think as much as possible you should avoid them, but you definitely like shouldn't necessarily.
Sometimes you can't, and sometimes for a short term, as long as you're looking for that root cause, um, it can be very helpful. I mean, for even just looking at thyroid problems with hypothyroidism. Well, if your thyroid is extremely underactive, it would be very difficult to say no to, being treated with levothyroxine, with thyroid hormone, to help correct that while you're also trying to understand what caused this autoimmune process. Am I deficient in any of the nutrients? How can I work to manage my stress, but still take the levothyroxine and don't avoid the problem, and still get your energy up with the levothyroxine and avoid some of the other symptoms of hypothyroidism, so that you can then, with a clear mind, kind of work on the triggers and hopefully make sure that you're addressing those as much as possible. Or even medications for hypertension. Of course, we don't want to go to medications right away, but if someone's blood pressure is extremely high and putting a strain on the heart, yes, let's work on diet, let's work on exercise, let's work on stress reduction. Extremely, extremely important. Or nutrient supplementation. But let's also make sure that we're not going to cause excessive strain on the heart failure, other complications, because we haven't addressed the problem, because we're so avoidant. So, my motto has always been lifestyle, nutrition, the pillars of health first. But hey, let's use these other great tools that are available if we really need them.
Yeah, that's definitely always been my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what integrative medicine is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yes.
integrating, you could say Western and Eastern, or
Yes.
standard, or allopathic and holistic. That neither one is right or wrong, but the combination of the two. Although, if you can go au naturel, that's awesome.
Of course.
It
Yes.
also saves you
Yes.
money.
Yes. Exactly. And
Yeah,
prevention really, and that's why prevention really is the
yeah,
key. Being aware of what habits might you have now that down the road could cause problems, um, and working on them now rather than waiting for them to pop up and then seeking those options.
yeah. And I know that that's actually, so going back to Dr. Cowan, his like my experience with him was actually very, well, there's two sides. There's this one I really want to talk about, his idea of functional medicine, and developmental care for pediatrics, but also going back to, I should have him on the show, really. I like, I should reach out to him. He doesn't know that I still think about him since I was a child. But just to put it in context, he was my pediatrician, and he was just great coincidence. He was my pediatrician. He was a standard pediatrician. My mom reminded me earlier, I spoke to her, that he was maybe 30 years old, like right out of residency.
Probably just started, right?
Yeah. So similar to you, I'm assuming, and like I'd like to talk to him, that he had somewhat of a similar journey to you, which is like you went through the system, you knew there was always something that needed to be tweaked, and you should look at medicine, maybe in also an alternative way.
Right.
But the way he handled that at the time, I mean, there were two different ways. One, my sister was diagnosed with cat scratch fever, which maybe you can explain. I always kind of said, to hurry it up, it's a little like rabies, but it's not rabies.
It's a bacterial infection, essentially. Yeah.
So the very, very rare thing that he discovered was that it wasn't bacterial, it wasn't viral, it was fungal. And she is the first case on record with fungal cat scratch fever. He actually asked my mom if he could write a paper on it in the New England Journal of Science.
Medicine? Oh,
Medicine,
wow.
thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure if he did, actually. I should look that up. But I know that he asked about that. And the wonderful thing about his involvement in this journey was that my sister had 3 operations. She was supposed to have 1. Uh,
Wow.
and it was in her neck. So we discovered it because she had a big lump in her neck. She spent her first birthday in hospital for this reason. And because he's a general pediatrician, or was very much general at that time, he couldn't do the surgery and he couldn't get more in depth, but he would make recommendations. And, to be honest about something, is he made a recommendation for a doctor that actually really messed my sister up. And he was like apparently heartbroken, and he took a little responsibility for that. And that's, he heard he was great for other reasons, but because of that, Dr. Cowan made sure that he investigated as far as humanly possible and would not rest until she was okay. And they found out everything they needed to about this case. And I don't know, I just remember that he was there for her. Like, he was that detective.
Yeah.
My mother hope, who was freaking the fuck out. And my sister doesn't have a trapezius on her right side anymore. It's like a piece of sinew. For those who don't know, your trapezius muscle is the largest muscle in your back, and it goes from like your shoulder all the way down your mid back.
So that's how big her surgery was.
Yeah, her surgery was just in her neck, but that surgeon that messed up cut the nerves, I guess, the details of this, to her trapezius. And actually through ballet, my sister was able to build up all the muscles abnormally around there. So she's actually even in her shoulder. She was not. She was like, whoop.
Yeah.
It meant the world to us that he was there. He was
committed. He was
so committed. He is a perfect example of the kind of practitioners that we bring on to Wellacopia, because they are part of the journey and they care, even if it's outside of their care. And that's why I'm so thankful for him. And clearly you're very thankful for him.
Yes, very much. Yes.
Yeah, he's changed your daughter's life in a way where he looked outside the box.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful having people like you support us. So thanks, Dr. Cowan.
Yes.
we gotta send this to him.
Yes.
Yeah, and
we're gonna see him in follow-up. Actually, I'll tell him that.
Right.
Talked about him. Yes.
Yeah. My original name was Reichenberg. You might remember it by that. That's not my last name anymore. So yes, Dr. Cowan, that was wonderful. Actually, I would love to ask you about your involvement in nutrition, because I've looked at your website and your social media, and you are very proactive in advocating for nutrition and even putting up a lot of recipes.
Yes. Yeah, so it's interesting. As I'm sure you know, in traditional medical education, we don't get a whole lot of nutrition training. And that's hopefully changing. But I really kind of learned more about nutrition through my family, through just growing up, and the way that I grew up in Serbia really was, there were farmers markets every day in Belgrade, where I lived. And I would go with my grandma when I was very, very little. We would go to the farmer's market and then sample fruit and veggies and feta cheese, and and be like, oh, this is good. Let's get 500 grams of that, and let's get this. And we actually we talked to the farmers that that made this food possible for us. And my grandma would cook everything from scratch. And I think that was even though I obviously didn't realize it at the time, but it was interesting, moving to Canada first and then the US, but to Canada really first from Serbia. I had no idea, in Belgrade at the time, we didn't have a whole lot of processed. We had some, but there were maybe 3 brands, and everything else was just food from scratch. And there really weren't a whole lot of options. There was a lot of bread, But other than that, there weren't a whole lot of packaged goods. It really was just food that your grandma or your mom makes. And I think that those really were kind of my fundamentals and my basics. Again, without really realizing it, because then when I moved, over time, I was able to keep some of that. And then there were times that my diet sort of changed and didn't feel so great. And then I kind of got back on track. But then after, kind of as part of this journey, I think to kind of build on to my, to this kind of naturally learned and observed kind of way of cooking and preparing food, it really was my integrative medicine fellowship, functional medicine, and just learning more about how different nutrients specifically affect our body and disease processes. Not only in extreme situations, of course, in medical school, you learn about extreme situations where, you know, you have to treat right away and somebody is, let's say, B12 deficient and they're having neuropathy already, and, you know, but also dealing with the subtleties and making sure that, you know, our body has a great way of keeping things in balance. But if we're not consuming enough nutrients, and now with the soil, you know, with the soils that just are depleted of nutrients, it's getting harder and harder. Also, a lot of people might have an issue with absorption. So we have to be mindful of, yes, our body has amazing, much more sophisticated mechanisms of keeping things in balance that we could ever understand. But sometimes our body still needs help because of these environmental things that are happening now, and because of gut problems that a lot of people experience. So I think that really shaped, and working closely with nutritionists and health coaches, and learning more about, you know, the whole kind of habit change piece of everything. Because I think that in my current practice, I would say I probably see many more people who are already very, very much driven and committed to changing their habits if it's going to help with their symptoms. So I don't necessarily have to do the extra motivational type of work. But it's so common. I mean, even in just the day-to-day of how our schools are feeding our kids. And you know, the girls, I mean, I love the idea of Girl Scouts, and my daughter is a Girl Scout. The idea of Girl Scouts is amazing and everything, but Girl Scout cookies, to read the ingredients on that. And so just kind of, I think as a mom and as a physician and as someone who grew up in a country at a time where it was just very basic foods that we didn't think about calories. We didn't think about, do you eat this or that? It was mostly plant-based. A lot of people ate meat. I just never really cared much for meat. But it was mostly plant-based, whole foods, and balanced, really, where you didn't have to think about all of these different components. We live in a different world now, unfortunately. It's very, very different. And we have to take care. And one of my missions now, just as a mom, is to think of both creative ways of how to create something. You mentioned some of the recipes, and a lot of it, like, I love to bake, but I also don't bake with, the regular flour and sugar, and I'm always looking to create recipes that are going to be nourishing and filled with flax seeds and hemp and chia seeds and nuts, and all of that goodness, but at the same time, be creative with maybe what I use to sweeten it. Do I use bananas? Do I use a little bit of, I actually like a monk fruit sweetener and erythritol. I like the Slacanto brand, and that's what I use. Or do you, or just finding creative ways that children are going to adopt healthy habits despite all of this noise out there. And all of these, I mean, they're in front of my kids' school. There are these like ice cream trucks and stands, and it just drives me crazy because It really is the path to 1/3 of the U.S. adults having diabetes by 2050, and many other issues. And so that's one of the areas that I am very passionate about and very much motivated to make a difference, because I see what it's, already such a huge gap between how I grew up and how my kids are growing up. But I also just love to experiment in the kitchen, and I cook with my kids. And so I love to post things that have nutritional value, but are also easy to make um, and taste good, because we want to eat things that still taste good.
Oh yeah. I mean, I actually only cook vegetarian, actually really only vegan except for eggs sometimes in my house. And I'm not saying you all have to be vegan, but it has been cheaper and easier, and I love it. Just putting it out there. And also for those spoonies out there, I know that a lot of you have issues with being able to cook because you're in too much pain, or you don't have, or you're fatigued. But first of all, if you do have someone, a support system, never feel bad about asking for that help to cook for you. And you can be vocal about what you want cooked, and that can be something simple and healthy. I'm happy, and I'm sure Dr. Boyana is happy to give some advice on that if you want. But also, when you have those spoons, that energy, those moments where you do, I do highly recommend using that time when you can to cook a lot, or just like a large amount of something and putting it away in the freezer. I do that all the time now. I do it like once a week, also because my husband doesn't make any food. That's a whole other issue. But yes, my personal advice, worth the spoons, even if that's what you do that day. It will be better for the rest of the week. Or yeah,
absolutely. And you'll be able to nourish yourself, which is then going to create positive results. Absolutely. I love batch cooking. Yeah.
And to defrost, there's a few ways to do it, some better than others. You could just leave it in the fridge overnight. You could. I actually, to do it faster, sometimes is I'll get a bowl of just like warm water and use it like floating that container for half an hour, and then it's fine. I was like, awesome. I didn't even put it in the microwave. So that's great. I wasn't planning on bringing this up, and I know we have to kind of wrap up, but I want to talk about it because it's a sensitive topic that's been coming up on a lot of the Facebook groups that I speak on, or that I'm part of. Some doctors, maybe a lot of doctors, will say to people with these chronic illnesses, and I'm mostly involved with people with fibromyalgia, so I guess let's just say for fibromyalgia, they recommend that they should lose weight and they won't have pain anymore. And someone this past week even did a poll asking what everyone's weight is, or like what weight range they're in, and if they're or rather if they're underweight, overweight, obese, whatever, normal weight. And yeah, people are really up in arms because they're like, yeah, they told me this as well. I'm like, a normal weight. I'm a normal weight. Yeah. And I decided to chime in, and I was like, look, I completely understand the frustration by that. And and a lot of them said, I lost weight and it didn't change anything. A lot of them said that. Yeah. And I was like, look, that is absolutely valid, because it is not just a weight thing. But the thing with fibromyalgia and a lot of chronic illnesses is that we don't know what the cause is, or also what could help. And there are countless stories of how nutrition, and probably therefore weight loss, can help diminish symptoms, sometimes even put people in, I guess you could say, remission. I happen to be one of those people, which is why I luckily don't need to see much in the way of practitioners right now. And I'm not on medication. I'm a nutritionist, and I'm not perfect by any means, but I know
I'm
not perfect. But when I don't eat well, and it's not like I'm without pain, but when I don't eat well, when I gain weight, things are worse.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I just want to put it out there for everyone. And I would love to hear what you have to say about this, that in my opinion, if you are overweight, obviously not if you don't need to lose weight, do not lose weight. Or if it would be unhealthy for you too, but it may be something that helps, but it's not losing weight. It's eating what's right for your body. like
Yeah.
like you were saying. But yeah, I totally get it if people are pissed when a doctor is like, just lose weight, you'll be fine.
Wait, you'll be fine. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I'm sure there's nothing more frustrating than that. I think that, well, it's interesting you mentioned that actually, and we hadn't spoken about this, you and I, before we started recording, but I definitely, I mean, I can say as a, person with no fibromyalgia, I have joint aches if I eat excess sugar, if I eat excess gluten. My body notices it. So I can only imagine how much these symptoms can be amplified in someone who has fibromyalgia.
Totally.
Again, I don't know of specific studies looking at weight loss and fibromyalgia or specific diets and fibromyalgia. But what I tell most of my patients, and I really work, so part of it is really kind of as a physician, meeting people where they are. And then the other piece is talking about, okay, well, if we don't change things, how do you think you're going to feel? Versus if we do change things, what are your hopes or your goals, or what do you think is going to happen? So if we talk about any sort of dietary changes, again, depending on where somebody is starting, they could already be having a very clean diet. And then we might have to tap into, okay, well, it's probably not your diet. There still could be something that's irritating that we just don't know. But then we also look at, well, let's look at stress. Let's look at your kind of emotional landscape and your environment, and or other toxins that you might be exposed to. But when it comes to nutrition itself, I generally recommend that people eat a plant-based diet. Doesn't necessarily have to be a vegan diet. And if they are eating meat, make sure that it's well-sourced meat or fish, and no sugar. I mean, I think just cutting out sugar completely. For
Yeah.
some people, it helps to cut out gluten. For other people, it helps to cut out grains completely. So we do sometimes, we'll do elimination diet protocols that slightly vary, and then we'll remove some of the usual suspects. Sometimes we'll do an autoimmune protocol where other food groups are eliminated. But I will say that I'm very cautious about eliminating too many food groups, because then again, we might run into the issue of nutrient deficiency, and so on. So these protocols, we really monitor patients over a period of time, and then again, slowly start to reintroduce certain foods. And then the foods that are kind of no-brainers, we just want to eliminate them for good. So whether it's sugar, alcohol, again, for some people it could be gluten. For some people it could be with arthritis. This is really more kind of for inflammatory arthritis, but nightshades. Some people might be irritated by nightshades. For other people, it may not make a difference. So again, a lot of this is, as I kind of stated earlier, a little bit of trial and error, because it's really the person with the condition that's an expert at their body. And then there's certain things that we want to remove, or at least minimize, remove dairy, remove sugar, remove gluten, see how you feel with these things. Some people might need to remove soy, see how you feel with these things, and then experiment and slowly start to add certain things back, but not the sugar, definitely.
Yeah, actually, I recently went through something kind of bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that for like at least a month, I was having a lot more, to be honest, gas. But like my air was filling up with, sorry, my belly was filling up with air, and it was very painful, distension. And I didn't know why it was getting worse. And then at Passover, actually, like a couple months ago, a part of the ritual is that you eat a bitter herb, and they didn't have any, so they gave us onions. And I ate a bite of an onion and immediately started to fill up with air. And I was like, I know what this is. This is probably a FODMAP issue, which really sucks, by the way. And that's like,
Are you on a low FODMAPs diet now?
so I'll explain. So this is really bizarre. So low FODMAPs, first of all, FODMAPs, how do I explain them? They're different kinds of sugars, like fermentable sugars, like oligo and monosaccharides. And like they can be really nutritious foods, but the fermentation process can really be very sensitive to your digestive system. So that could be like cabbage and onions and garlic. Like, I'm like mostly vegan. How is this going to
How is this going to work? Right.
And then I think I started to notice I had things by accident in those and didn't get reaction. So I did a huge elimination, and I was like, this is bad because you talked about nutrient deficiencies, low
Mhm.
FODMAP diets, because it takes out actually like a lot of healthy things,
It does, yeah.
and be kind of dangerous. And then long story short, somehow we whittled down what it was, and I couldn't believe what it was. It's
Okay.
apples.
Yeah.
I was
You were,
astonished. And I love apples. And every single morning, it's the only thing I like always eat, or at least during the week, is I make oatmeal,
mhm.
um, and with almond milk and chia seeds, and I stew apples every Sunday. Which, by the way, is like super easy if other people want to do it. It happened to not be good for me, and I just stopped using apples. Now I use like blueberries, and
Okay.
I don't have the issue
Yeah.
anymore. I was like,
Great
that's
that you were able to
crazy.
identify the one thing without removing everything from your diet. And yeah.
So I thought about like, what do I eat a lot of like
Mhm.
every day that I think is good for me? And then that's how I did it. Anyway, it's just an
Yeah.
anecdote of how like you never know.
Yes, it's true. It's true. You never know. And
But
there might be a time that you could reintroduce the apples, down
yeah,
the road. But
well,
yeah,
things change. I mean,
yeah,
I've had apples my whole life. Um,
yeah,
I'm a big apple fan, so
yeah.
bizarre. Anyway, we do have to wrap up. I don't want to.
Mhm.
There's so many things I feel like we didn't even talk about, and that could always mean we do an additional.
Yes.
Um, but I would like to end with, I guess, the main message. If you can find one main message to leave everyone with. Um, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I would I would say, and I would really kind of go back to that, to talking about critical points in our lives and talking about transformative experiences, and that going from that state of hopelessness to hope. Um, One of the things that I think makes a big difference to people is knowing that although there are a number of factors we can't control, there are some things that we can control. And whether this is through mindfulness based stress reduction, through another form of meditation practice, through therapy, through EFT tapping, there's so many modalities that I wish we had like more time to actually dive deeper into and talk about, acupuncture. Um, but whatever the modality is, self-examination, talking to friends, journaling, whatever the modality is, I think that looking within, relating to yourself, and knowing that no matter what, I can rely on myself, and there are things that I can control, and there are things that I um, absolutely have full control over, even though there are many aspects over there that just simply cannot exert influence over. And even those things that are beyond my control, I completely control how I respond to them. And I think that's a big thing, again, when we talk about any really condition. We know that the majority of conditions are in one way or another related to stress. And I remember that before going into integrative and functional medicine, when I really was seeing just such a broad kind of spectrum of people with a number of different conditions, ranging in different levels of acuity um, and severity, I found that the patients who kind of had the most challenging problems were the ones who still kind of needed to kind of do a little bit more exploration into what are some of the non-physical elements or aspects of their experience or their condition. So I would just kind of leave with that, because I think it's important that we address it as physicians or other providers. And I think that for patients, when we all go into our doctor's offices or our chiropractors or our therapists, to keep in mind that it's really there's yes, externally there are a lot of factors that can help us heal, but we are really the ones where it starts. We start the healing process. And there's still a lot that we can do, even when it seems that many things are out of control or not well understood or not being yet addressed.
You're speaking to my heart. Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for sharing everything you have today. As expected, this was a tremendous pleasure. And we'll be talking again soon, I'm sure.
Yes.
A lovely Friday. It's beautiful here. I don't know about in New York City, but it's beautiful here in Rochester. Finally.
It's a nice day here too. Yeah, yeah. Well, this was such a pleasure. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
And that's a wrap on another episode of Invisible Not Broken. Thank you guys for listening so much. I also want to thank you for something that's been happening behind the scenes. Dozens of you have been reaching out to me, whether it be through Wellacopia or off Wellacopia, wanting to support our mission of matching people with chronic illnesses to their ideal practitioners, whether that be providing your trusted referrals of doctors, contributing unique content, peer support one-on-one to new users. The fact that you guys are so interested in making sure that Wellacopia's mission comes to fruition, I cannot tell you how heartwarming it has been. It's been fueling me every day to keep going, and frankly, been giving me some spoons. For those of you who don't know the Spoonie theory, I highly recommend you look it up. Anyway, I just want to say thank you again. If you guys haven't reached out to me personally and maybe just want to get to know one another, please do. I'll leave my email and contact number in the show notes. Love you all so much. And as always, be kind, be gentle, and be friggin' badass.